Today's gospel passage is about the danger of idols, both the danger of seeing others as idols and allowing ourselves to be seen in idyllic ways. Idols are one of those things we talk about, but I don't think we understand them very well. And so let me do my best to define how I would define an idol. An idol is anything that we put more value in than it actually has. So when we speak of a musician or actor that people idolize, what we're saying is we treat them as if their value to the world is more substantial than their gift of acting or singing. And we can tell this is the case by the efforts people make just to have some experience with them, even if unrelated to their gifts in the arts. One classic example of this that came to my mind was when the Beatles first performed on the Ed Sullivan Show back in the 60s. And for you youngins, we used to have these things called televisions that were like YouTube channels. And it was a big deal when they performed. And I would encourage you to go on YouTube and look up Ed Sullivan, the Beatles, and watch the clip of these girls screaming throughout the entire song. It was so distracting that you couldn't actually listen to the music. So think about that dispassionately for a second. Here are these people who love the Beatles' music so much that they traveled to New York, perhaps across the country, stood in line for hours, paid probably a hefty sum, all so they could be there to, what? Not hear the music, scream over the top of it? No, clearly they had turned the Beatles into an idol. It was no longer about the music, but about something else. I'd like to put in contrast to that the first principle and foundation of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And he says this: God created human beings to praise, reverence, and serve God, and by doing this, to save their souls. God created all other things on the face of the earth to help fulfill this purpose. From this, it follows that we are to use the things of this world only to the extent that they help us to this end. And we ought to rid ourselves of the things of this world to the extent that they get in the way of this end. Now, for completeness, this principle gets complicated very quickly. St. Ignatius did not spend his life in the sanctuary in perpetual adoration. This is not what he means. He knew, as we should know, that when we love our family and our neighbor, we are loving someone made in the image of God, and so we are living out our call to love and serve God. In that way, we are fulfilling what God calls us to through fellow human beings. Similarly, when we get up early to see the sunrise, we are basking in the glory of God's creation. And so we are seeing in creation God, and again, fulfilling its noble purpose. Or even perhaps when we complete a task that we might even look back on and say that wasn't the wisest task to do, we're still practicing the virtues of fortitude and perseverance. And so even in that, we can be serving God. So it's not that we shouldn't be living life to the fullest, quite the contrary, but that the fullness we are doing is directed towards things that help us worship and serve God. So let's bring that back to the gospel passage today. Notice that Jesus actually has a lot of positive things at first to say about the scribes and the Pharisees. It's not that he says they have no value. In fact, he tells the people to do and observe all things whatsoever they tell you. That's a pretty big statement of they have something we need to listen to, and it's important. But at the same time, Jesus says that their value and their purpose ends there. They are not to be turned into mini gods for us to idolize, as they seem to be wanting. So the question we must ask ourselves this week is, who or what do we idolize? Do we look at our cars as more than just a means of transportation? Do we see money as more than a tool to give us what we need to live a good and healthy life? Or perhaps one that hits a little too close to home for me. Are we using food as a substitute for other forms of meaning that has become more than just the nourishment of our bodies? Or someone pointed out to me after 7:30, what about our cell phones? Have we turned them into a sort of idol? Or one that came to my mind, are we tempted to use our pets as a way to avoid more challenging and more meaningful human relationships? Turning to people in our lives, are there people we give deference to that is beyond appropriate for the role in our life? Or on the other side, are we allowing others to do that towards us because it stokes our ego and gives us comforts beyond what we deserve? Now, it's human nature to fall into these sorts of thinking. It's very natural to be tempted towards it, but we are called to rise above it. So let's spend some time this week in reflective prayer to better see the things in this life that we idolize and how we can avoid doing so in the future.